Hello and welcome to another new episode of Learning Simplified. In our previous tutorial, we had learned about the transform function which was related to rotate and translate. In this tutorial, we are going to understand the scale transform function. So stay tuned. Now in case of transform function, scale is another transform function that resizes an element both in 2D and 3D space. The amount of this scaling, it practically is defined by a vector. It can be resized both in the horizontal and the vertical dimensions at different scales. Now in case of a 2D plane, first of all, I would like to say here that scale transform function property, it practically happens both in 2D and 3D space. In case of a 2D space, it practically resizes the element into both horizontal and the vertical direction. But in case of a 3D element, a third format, that means the z-axis, it is now added to that particular element. But we have to remember that we are individually working with an HTML element which is 2D in nature. And that is why it might not be possible to observe the things in this particular format. It will be a matter of later discussion, but I would like to say you that it is possible to scale, rotate, skew, translate, all those things, all those properties, transform functions to implement into a particular element both in 2D and 3D space. Now let's get back to this scaling transformation. In our previous tutorial, we had seen how to translate things. We are now aware of how to rotate things or how to translate things. Now in this case, we are going to know about scaling property. The very first thing that we are going to do, we are going to commenting off this particular syntax here, which practically depicted this transform function. And if we get back to our project and reload, we can see that it is now alright, it is back into its position. And on the other hand, all we are going to do, this is the parent element here, this trans checker, and this is the child element. So all we are now going to do, we are going to put a margin of 0 auto condition here. There it goes. Now if we get back and reload, we can see that this individual fox image, it is practically residing in the exact middle of this particular device. Now everything is in position. So now let's get back to our project. And here, as we have mentioned earlier, that scaling can be done in 2D space both in x-axis and y-axis. So first of all, we are going to work with x-axis command, and we can see that this is scale. All we have to do now, we have to put a certain value. In this respect, I would like to say that scale is practically unitless. It has no unit. So you do not have to mention here any unit as you are defining a resizing property. That is why you won't be needing any kind of unit over here. But in case of translate, we had used their 100 px because we wanted to move our element into a particular direction and into a particular amount. All we are stating, we are just resizing our elements into a particular direction, either into x-axis or into this y-axis, and that is why we do not need to mention any kind of unit. That is why we have provided this particular unitless value over here. And another thing, this is the default value. If we want to grow in size, then we need to define something which is more than 1. And if we have to shrink them all, then we need to define something which is less than 1. And if the value is negative, then in that particular case, the element is going to shift its direction from one part into another part. Now if we put here 2, we are putting this value 2 over here. Now let's get back to our project. And if we now move our cursor here, we can see that the image is practically growing in size into this x-axis direction. As we had mentioned, this transform to be taking place into this x-axis. But if we put here transform y, that means we are now putting this scale command into this y-axis direction, and if we get back to our project and move our mouse over, we can see that this image is now growing in the y-axis direction. But what if we wish to have a definitive grow maintaining a proper aspect ratio? Then all we need to do, we need to get back to our project, and we can put there this individual command of scale x, which will be 2, and then comes the scale y, which is 2. If we get back to our project, we will see that this will be the result. Now the question is it true that we have to adopt this whole long syntax instead of something short? What if we mention here, first of all, let's move this x and y condition. We mention a scale transform function, and we are putting both these values over here, and we are removing this particular thing off. That means we are not mentioning whether this particular element is growing in the x-axis direction, in the y-axis direction individually. All we are going to do here, we are practically summing them up into a particular command, and this is it. So if we get back to our project, we will see that no noticeable change is being taken place over here. So we may conclude that this individual command of, if we just comment this thing off, and if we mention that transform scale x, it has a value 2, and scale y, it has a value 2. Now if we do it over here and get back, we will see that the same thing is happening over here. It is practically growing in size, maintaining the exact same aspect ratio. So there's absolutely no problem if we now shift it. Instead of making it over here this command, we are now turning this command back into position, and we can now see that this is the command scale to where we have practically summoned them up. And if we get back to our project, we will see that the exact same thing is happening here. So we may conclude that this is the shorthand abbreviation of this individual command, which defines a definitive grow both in x-axis and y-axis, which is implemented here individually. So this is the short syntax of this whole implementation, and we can see that both of them are practically working.